Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Concordia's Vice Chair of the Board, Caroline Scullin, and from the U.S. Department of State and Special Presidential Advisor to the Summit of the Americas, the Honorable Christopher J. Dodd.
Good afternoon. What an amazing day and particular afternoon of conversations. For our final session today, I'm privileged to introduce the Honorable Christopher J. Dodd. Everyone knows him. He was previously part of a panel this afternoon. Senator Dodd's esteemed career in public service and deep connection and engagement in the Americas began as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic. He was elected to Congress in 1974 and served 3 terms in the House and 5 terms in the U.S. Senate, where he was the longtime chair of the Senate Subcommittee on the Americas. He continues his service currently as Special Presidential Advisor for the Americas. Excuse me 1 second. Mm-hmm. Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for being with us today, both in the earlier strategic dialogue on regional unity and now to discuss the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity. The strategic dialogue ended, it seemed to me, with an eagerness for collaboration. To start, could you share more with us about your past and current role as a Special Presidential Advisor for the Americas? And if you have further thoughts on this afternoon's strategic dialogue, please.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's nice to be back, and I thank Concordia for inviting me to participate. I've got a bit of a bad throat, but nonetheless happy to be a part of the program, and nice to be with you, Caroline.
Thank you.
We've known each other going back some time, so it's nice to be with you. No, this is, the issue is, to me, it's been waiting for a long time. I mean, I'm first of all, deeply grateful. When I applied to the Peace Corps, as I mentioned to an earlier audience, Thomas Jefferson was still president when I applied. I applied to any country in the world. I said I can go anywhere in Africa, Asia, Latin America. I was so enthralled with the idea as a 21-year-old to go someplace and work in a city or an urban environment. And by the luck of the draw, I was sent to the Dominican Republic, up in the mountains of the Cordillera Central, the major mountain range in the country, to a little village called Benito Monción. I couldn't say my name in Spanish, let alone put together a sentence. But that village of Benito Monción, where I spent the next 2.5 years, really changed my life, without any question at all. I come from a family which Irish, but like Latin America, they're the Irish all over Latin America. My grandmother's name was O'Higgins, her maiden name. And for Chile for a long time, I told people I was related to Bernardo O'Higgins in a way. And, but it changed everything in terms of what I cared about. Latin America became a passion of mine. And so when I was elected to Congress and served, particularly in the Senate, stayed pretty much concentrated on our hemisphere. A lot of people got involved with issues all over the world. I was always impressed with senators, Democrats or Republicans, who concentrated on a couple of issues. Didn't mean they were important all the time, but when they were, even whether you agreed or disagreed with someone, you were curious about what their point of view was. So over the years, I worked on children's issues. I was from Connecticut, so I did work on the banking issues, and then Latin America, the hemisphere. Joe Biden and I sat next to each other on the Foreign Relations Committee for 30 years and developed a strong, wouldn't surprise you, personal friendship and relationship. And that still exists to this day. And as I was telling one group of people this morning, on December 22nd of 2021, I got a call, one of those unknown calls, unknown caller, which my wife has promised me never to answer one because it's just a spam call, so just don't touch them. And so I didn't touch it. And then I noticed the unknown caller had left an unknown message. And I decided I could listen to them anyway. And as I picked up the phone to listen, it was the President of the United States calling. So Merry Christmas the time. Anyway, he asked me if I'd get involved with him, particularly on the Summit of the Americas. I was here and participated in Miami back in the 1990s on the first of the summits. And so I agreed. I didn't know what it meant or involved. I'd been out of Congress about 12 years at that point, having left in 2011. And so I got involved, about April got involved, and discovered very few people were coming to the summit. Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil had decided they weren't going to go. And a number of the CARICOM countries also said they were not going to attend. So my job was to round up countries to hope that they would show up. And it turned out to be a very successful summit. Argentina came, Brazil came. I spent about a day with President Bolsonaro. And then, of course, AMLO never travels much anyway, so he didn't show up. But you couldn't have had a summit without Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico all together. But the fact that two of them ended up coming out of the three, it made it possible. And the CARICOM countries came by and large, the 14 countries. So that's how I sort of get back involved on the thing. It was that relationship. It's now morphed into that because at the summit, the president made two convincing and I think meaningful speeches. One was on immigration in the hemisphere and elsewhere, and the second was on the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which was a concept and an idea that might make a difference in providing the kind of economic growth that was so important, a job creation effort in both the Caribbean as well as in the Americas. And they're starting to talk about that partnership idea. So my job became then to reach out to countries to see who might be interested in being a part of this. We ended up choosing 11 countries, 12 countries, that all had either free trade agreements or agreements involving economic growth. So they had some understanding of how those would work. I won't try to go down the list of the 12 countries, but it was pretty broad-based group, and began a process that was very meaningful, things that were now already underway now for over a year and a half or so. We had the three tracks, the foreign policy or the political track, the trade track, and the financing track. Already, in fact, Janet Yellen last week at the meeting of the IMF and the World Bank met with the 12 foreign ministers of the countries that were a part of this kicking off. Catherine Tai, the trade representative, ambassador rather, will be meeting in a month or so with the 11 or 12 finance ministers. And Tony Blinken has agreed, obviously, to meet with the foreign ministers of the countries as well. Since then, 7 additional countries have asked if they could be considered to be a part of this. This is not going to be pay $5, you're a member of the club. And it will be up to the countries to decide what involves membership in this partnership. So of the 34 countries in this hemisphere, 14 of which come out of the Caribbean and the CARICOM countries, leaving 20 countries in both Central and South America. We take the 11 or 12 now that have joined, the 6 or 7 who are asking to be considered for it, you're getting very critical mass. And again, the hard work has started on a number of areas. There are 3 tracks, as I mentioned, the foreign policy, the finance, and the trade track. Those are already moving. I mentioned Janet Yellen's meetings going on as well. Secondly, we've already put offices and people together of the 12 countries, dealing with training, with capital requirements, as well as the maturing of the relationships within the program. To give you some idea how things have moved already, the IDB and the DFC in the United States have already committed, the money is there, $3 billion for infrastructure programs in the countries that we've mentioned as well. You've got a program on the workforce that was already held in San Jose, Costa Rica, where 170 businesses showed up to talk about what sort of training would people need to move into the technology jobs that we're talking about creating. Technology, energy, and health are the ones, the 3 that the nations described. I should step back for a minute, Caroline, because I don't want to filibuster on this, but I think it's important. And look, I served with 7 presidents over those 36 years, and some wonderful people. People I agreed with, disagreed with, wonderful people by and large. But I must say that typically, which has happened regardless of party, Latin America, our hemisphere, the Americas, sort of gets short shrift when it comes to over the years. Nothing new, everyone knows that. I presume people do here. And there were good efforts, the Good Neighbor Policy, the Alliance for Progress, people who I think legitimately cared about things, but nothing ever seemed to take off. So the idea was with the partnership program, could we do something and create something with a legitimate and true partnership? So rather than the United States dictating what it would take for you to become an absolute member of this group of nation states, there was held over 3 days in early November, November 2nd and 3rd, a bit of the November 1st, in Washington. 11 heads of state came to it. The first day was at the IDB with a large gathering of private sector individuals who wanted to know whether or not there was anything appealing to them among the 11 presidents who talked about what their countries offered or might be looking for, which was a very successful day. The Atlantic Council held a dinner for the 11 heads of state. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee held a reception for the 11 heads of state. Janet Yellen met with all 11 heads of state to talk about the role of the Treasury Department and the financing side of this as well. It turned out to be very successful, but the last event was a 2.5-hour meeting with the president alone in the East Room of the White House, which is rarely used for this kind of a meeting. It was so unique and so different. And just to put it in context, this was less than a month after Gaza in that day. In normal times, and I say again this respectfully, in previous administrations over the years, the meeting would have been postponed till next year or something, because obviously Gaza, the Middle East, is important. To the president's great credit, in my view, he said, no, we've arranged for this meeting, we want to do it, and he did, spent the time. Each president presented what they thought, what might work to get this done. So I don't want to bore you or your audience with all the different things that have happened over the year, but it has begun. We're working at it. Let me add quickly that the Americas Act, which I've worked very closely with 4 of my colleagues in the Congress. One was Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, a Republican on the committee, along with Michael Bennett, who's a Democrat from Colorado. And then in the House, you have the Congresswoman Salazar, along with Congressman Capellan from the Dominican Republic. It's unique in this environment going on, which has been not pleasant to watch the Congress of the United States, regardless of your party. But here we are. We have 4 members of Congress, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and bicameral, bipartisan proposal to codify exactly what we've suggested with the Americas partnership. The example I would use, if I had to pick one, it hasn't happened yet. We've had a very strong relationship when we developed APEC, which was, of course, the Asian Pacific countries. So that countries like Chile, like Peru, Panama, Mexico, all those that are Pacific-facing countries on the western part, obviously, of this hemisphere, are members of that group. There's a permanent organization in Singapore, has 50 employees on a daily basis, working all the time on how we can encourage private sector investment in Asian Pacific countries. We ought to try something like that with the Americas Partnership. If it's just an idea that floats around, everyone will recite, in one panel we had here today, everyone will tell you millions of problems that we are facing, from climate change to energy, to obviously semiconductors, to nearshoring, friendshoring, all these ideas, not to mention the security issues and the like. The issue is, of course, that no one nation, not even a Brazil, can on their own solve any of these problems. True. If we don't start very quickly to realize that there has to be a sense of partnership in these matters, if we have any hope at all of dealing with these larger questions. So the idea behind this is to form that organization here that people want to be a part of and what its values are going forward. And I subscribe, and I'll end with this note for you, Caroline. I subscribe to the notion. President Biden has said this, and I believe he means it because I talked to him or enough. There's no reason in the world why our hemisphere, with 1/10 of the global population between Canada and Ushuaia here, we're a small percentage of the population of the world. We have more than half of the fresh water in the world, more than half of the forests in the world. The world eats the food that we grow in our hemisphere. You get on a long list. And so we ought to be talking about what we could do together to get back on our feet again, to solve the problems that people talk about. That's what the Americas Partnership tries to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you've already answered several of the questions that I had, which is the status of the partnership and what's been accomplished thus far, and what the next key milestone is, which is the codification, so that it really is a permanency for this momentum to be to be taken advantage
I commend Bill Cassidy and Michael Bennett and his colleagues in the House. And it's, it'd be hard to imagine anything getting through the Congress these days, but this very well may and might.
Right. So the partnership includes, as you know, I mean, and you've, as you said, gone from 12 and 7 want to join. That is significant momentum in the region. And there's a wide range of issues they're facing, from upcoming elections to civil unrest.
7 of them right down the road this year.
All right. From your deep experience and your current vantage point, how do we get through, do they get through, and does the partnership get through the next year? And how can the Biden-Harris administration
Well, we're waiting for, we'd love to see the Americas Act get passed, but we're not sitting around waiting for that to happen.
Good.
So I've mentioned you already, where there's already $3 billion that we've already agreed on, the money's there. So for nation states and those groups that want to improve on their infrastructure programs, they can. The IDB has voted unanimously to move its money into the IDB Invest Fund.
And very few people vote unanimously anywhere now.
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
And they did it over 2 years. I think that Ilan Goldfein is doing a terrific job as the head of that organization now. So we're really getting some progress and cooperation. I was there in the Dominican Republic a few weeks ago when they voted unanimously to move forward at $3.5 billion over the next 7 years to move the partnership forward going forward. I've mentioned to you already what's happened in Costa Rica on dealing with job creation. You're dealing with Uruguay and Canada that are working on the issue of semiconductors and so forth. So there's a lot not waiting for that to move forward.
Right. So this audience, and Concordia in particular, has a deep track record of forging public-private partnerships.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
And you had a call to action this morning. So I'd ask you now, how can we, all of us gathered here from the public, private, nonprofit, and academic sectors, as a collective, help the Americas Partnership?
Well, first of all, and I again, others here that may take issue with what I'm about to say to you. One of my concerns is that, and particularly in the Caribbean, the Central American, South America populations, despite the fact that there's a common language, common culture, all of these things we talk about, there's not a lot of communication between nation states. There's not a lot of you've got great universities in this hemisphere. My experience has been that if you're a family in Argentina or Chile or Colombia or wherever, and you've got the resources, and you decide you're going to go on to a university, you'll go to one in your own country, or you go to Europe and come to the United States. You'll rarely find an Argentinian at Catholic University in Chile, or you watch people going into Colombia, where great universities have been over the years. So they don't really know each other as well, despite the commonality of culture and language and so forth. So part of it is there's kind of this sort of early 20th century mentality that goes on. I think what happened in Ecuador needed to be better thought out than it was. I don't think we're well served to getting banner headlines about one head of state spending all day suggesting the other head of state or the other country ought to be removed from the United Nations, for instance. Let's get serious about what we need to do together. I'll repeat what I said a moment ago. Not a single issue you can raise can be solved by any single nation.
Right.
So unless we get cooperation and partnerships and encourage the Asian nations as well as the Europeans to participate in this partnership agreement. So we have a very attractive area, and we need to become evangelists on this. If I'm the only one talking about it, and I've got a president who may not be reelected or may get reelected here, then it's going to not go anywhere in this thing. There got to be people committed to it and become evangelists on the subject matter. If we don't create jobs in these countries, people emigrate for simple reasons. They have no sense that their aspirations can be filled where they grew up and were born and lived. If they feel as though they have no chance to do that, they do what 150 million people are doing as you and I sit here and talk all over the world. They walk.
So what we need to do is create a communications campaign, and I will invite you to come back to Concordia and continue to speak about that momentum.
Did I filibuster the whole time?
No. We have 53 seconds left.
Yeah.
It wasn't a filibuster.
Yeah.
But I want you consider Concordia an open rostrum for the Americas Partnership and to really continue to see how we can work together.
Yeah. You've got great people. I spoke last night at a dinner, had a wonderful dinner with about 10 or 12 very successful business people here in Miami, all of whom were born and raised in countries in the Americas, in Latin America. And they're terrific. And it was an interesting conversation. Again, people always have the conversation about what's wrong.
Right.
Well, it's awfully difficult to convince some business person to go to a certain country when everybody that's talking about the country said, I wouldn't go near the place. You know,
Then you will be our reminder,
Yeah.
the positive reminder. You led this afternoon, ending the strategic dialogue on a positive note.
Yeah.
I thank you for being here today, and we will ask you to come back and continue to talk on that positive note, because that's what we need in the Americas.
No,
Thank you so
Caroline,
much,
thank
Senator.
you very much. Appreciate it, too.
Thank you.
Nice to meet all you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.